the shimmering coastal road unwound before me, a ribbon of asphalt mirroring the boundless ocean, yet within me a tempest raged. My name is Rear Admiral Evelyn Hayes, a keeper of secrets that could topple empires, a veteran of steel corridors and skies that held no pity. At 46, I stand as a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy, bearing the weight of 2 silver stars earned in an ocean of fire and steel. But to my family, the illustrious Vances of Newport, I remained merely Evelyn, the inconvenient daughter. Today, as I drove towards my sister Isabel's wedding, they were blissfully unaware that the meticulously constructed edifice of their perfect, polished lives rested upon a foundation of lies, a foundation I could shatter with a single, whispered truth. A foolish, fragile hope, like a dandelion seed upon the breeze, dared to surface. Perhaps the crisp sea air, the celebratory champagne, could finally wash away the decades of feeling invisible, of being perpetually cast in the shadows of my family's curated narrative. For a fleeting moment, I yearned to be simply a woman, longing for the warmth of genuine familial embrace. Then, a viper's strike, cloaked as a text message, shattered that delicate illusion. My mother, Eleanor Vance, her words often daggers disguised as pleasantries, had found a new target. "Evelyn, for heaven's sake, I heard you were contemplating wearing that uniform. Don't? It's an embarrassment to the Vance name." My grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles stark white against the dark leather. An embarrassment. The very symbols of my arduous journey, the insignia of countless sacrifices, reduced to an insult. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp, replaced by a profound and dangerous cold. They wished me to feel small, insignificant. Have you, my friends, ever been made to feel small for the very essence that forged you into greatness? They expected a phantom in a subdued beige dress, a quiet shadow to fade into the opulent background. Instead, they were about to confront a Rear Admiral, resplendent in her full, unapologetic uniform. A declaration, not a plea. This decision was not born from a single cutting message, but forged in the crucible of years, the quiet dismissals, each a minuscule cut, together bleeding me dry of any hope for their acceptance. The final, searing wound had opened but weeks prior, upon my return to my Norfolk apartment after a grueling joint forces exercise in the tumultuous Atlantic. The apartment's stillness, the welcome silence after the relentless hum of a warship, was a balm. I craved only the anonymity of my own space. Pouring myself a glass of water, the ice cubes clinking in the sudden quiet, I settled with my tablet. Social media was a world of curated happiness I seldom visited, yet that day, an inexplicable pull drew me in, and there it was, a professionally shot photograph of my sister, Isabel, her face radiant with joy, twirling in the arms of a man I didn't recognize. The setting, the waterfront deck of the Ida Lewis Yacht Club in Newport, resonated with my family's social circle. The caption, she said, "Yes to the future Mr. and Mrs. Halpern." My heart did not sink, it simply stopped, a hollow thud in my chest. Hundreds of comments flooded the post. My mother Eleanor showered it with effusive heart emojis. My father Richard had reposted the image, his own caption a pronouncement. "So proud of our beautiful family and the legacy we continue to build." I scrolled through every photograph in that album. Isabel with her friends, Isabel with her new fiancé, Isabel with our parents. I searched for my name, in the tags, the comments, anywhere. Nothing. It was a digital erasure, not an oversight, but a stark message. I was not part of that beautiful family, not part of that legacy. I was merely elsewhere. The feeling was not sadness, but a cold, stark emptiness. The disorienting sensation of gazing upon a map of your own life to discover your hometown has been inexplicably wiped clean. Days later, the physical manifestation of my status arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope, the expensive cardstock my mother favored, lay in my mailbox, faintly scented with her signature Lily of the Valley perfume. But the address label struck me like a physical blow, not Rear Admiral Evelyn Hayes, not even Evelyn. It was addressed to the Vance family, Norfolk, VA, as if I were a mere satellite office of the main brand. Inside, the invitation, elegantly embossed, announced the wedding at the Chandler at Cliff Walk. No handwritten note, no personal touch, merely a QR code for RSVP. It was not an invitation, it was a summons, a bureaucratic notification to a peripheral family member. It was my mother's final, chilling reminder that my attendance was permitted, not welcomed. That very evening, I sought grounding in a world where my existence held weight. I called Captain Mark Evans. My hand was steady despite the tremor in my soul. He answered on the second ring. "Admiral," he acknowledged, his voice a familiar anchor of respect. I dispensed with pleasantries. "Mark," I said, my own voice distant, frighteningly calm. "They're getting married." A beat of silence. He understood precisely. "Who? They were, I see," he replied, his tone carefully neutral. Yet I detected the undercurrent of anger, a quiet loyalty on my behalf. "They don't want an admiral in the family photos, Mark," I stated, the words tasting like ash. "They want a ghost." Another, longer pause. I could picture him, staring out at the naval base, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, firm, laced with the fierce allegiance forged in shared danger. "Ma'am," he said, the single word carrying the immense weight of years of service together. "Ghosts are nothing. It's the light that makes the shadows, and your light is bright enough to black out their entire sky." His words did not heal the wound, but they cauterized it. They stopped the bleeding. Ending the call, a cold resolve settled deep in my bones. I walked to my closet and opened the doors. There, hanging in its protective garment bag, was my service dress white uniform, the crisp, immaculate white, the rows of ribbons narrating stories they would never comprehend. On the shoulders, the 2 silver stars I had painstakingly earned. They called it an embarrassment. They did not know its true name. It was my armor, it was my truth, and it was the only thing I would be wearing to that wedding. The oppressive weight of my mother's text message felt heavier than any gear I'd ever carried. It wasn't just a command, it was the chilling echo of a lifetime of dismissal. As I gripped the steering wheel, the image of my crisp white uniform in the closet faded, replaced by a memory just as stark, just as white. It was the memory of my very first uniform, and the day I earned the right to wear it, the day my family decided they had better things to do. My mind drifted back, the miles of I-95 blurred into the expansive blue of Annapolis. The Navy, Marine Corps Memorial Stadium pulsed with an almost tangible electricity. A sea of families, buzzing with a pride so palpable you could taste it. Cheers swelled through the air, mingling with the soaring notes of "Anchors Aweigh." And then, the moment came. The command was given, and thousands of white covers arced into the brilliant blue sky. A flock of white birds taking flight in a perfect, unified celebration. I stood there, a newly commissioned ensign in the United States Navy, my smile feeling stiff and unfamiliar on my face. My eyes scanned the stands, searching for the section, the row, the precise seats I'd circled on the map for them. But they were empty. Just 2 vacant blue plastic chairs, stark in a crowd of thousands. The phone call had come that very morning as I polished the brass buttons on my crisp new uniform. It was my father, Richard Vance, his voice clipped and hurried. "Evelyn, something's come up. A major investment opportunity in Shanghai. Terrible timing, I know, but it's a game changer. We simply can't miss it." My mother, Eleanor Vance, chimed in, her voice silken, dripping with feigned sympathy. "You know your father, darling. Business comes first. We're so proud, of course." And Isabel, my 17-year-old sister, had a club tennis tournament. A club tennis tournament. Not regional, not national, a simple, local club tennis tournament, apparently, was more important than her only sister graduating from one of the world's most prestigious military academies. I stood among my cheering classmates, hugging each other, posing for photos with their beaming parents, and I had never felt so profoundly, utterly alone. The photo I have from that day shows me with my 3 roommates, arms slung around each other, smiling bravely. But if you look closely at my eyes, you can make out the hollow space where my family should have been. A week later, a thick envelope from their bank arrived at my modest new housing unit. Inside, no letter, no proud note, just a check for 5,000 odd and a small, elegant card in my mother's perfect, impersonal script. Congratulations, darling. Buy yourself something nice to celebrate. Perhaps a pearl necklace. A pearl necklace. As if 4 grueling years of marine engineering, sleepless nights studying naval strategy, and a solemn oath to defend my country could be measured and dismissed with a piece of jewelry. It wasn't just thoughtless. It was a profound insult. It was their way of translating my world into the only language they understood, the language of price tags and status symbols. In their world of lavish parties and designer brands, my accomplishments held no tangible value. I remember standing there, holding the check, feeling the cold weight of their fundamental misunderstanding. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, I tore the check into precise, tiny pieces and let them flutter into the trash like confetti at a parade of one. That was the last time I hoped they would understand. The sting of that memory intensified with every return home to Newport. The house was a veritable museum of Isabel's triumphs. The walls adorned with photos of her winning ribbons in equestrian events, her prom pictures, her Boston University acceptance letter framed in intricately carved silver. Months after my Annapolis graduation, an entire glossy album was dedicated to her 17th birthday. Dozens of photos taken at Boston's famed L'Espalier restaurant. Isabel, in a designer dress, laughing as our parents presented her with the keys to a pristine white BMW. My father and mother stood on either side of her, their faces beaming with a pride that was almost blinding, and my presence in this family shrine. A small 4x6 photo, tucked away on a crowded bookshelf in the library, almost obscured behind a leather-bound Dickens collection. It was the photo from graduation day, the one with my roommates. To any guest, it would look like a picture of their daughter's friends. The message was unmistakably clear. The Vance family had only one daughter, one perfect, beautiful daughter. I was merely an occasional stranger in the living room. I should have known it would be like this. I should have remembered the night I told them I was accepting my appointment to Annapolis. We were in the mahogany-paneled living room, the air thick with the scent of old money and wood polish. My father set down his scotch, the crystal clinking softly against the marble coaster. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a deep, wary disappointment, somehow far worse. "Evelyn," he had said, his voice flat, "the Navy is no place for a Vance woman. Our name is built in boardrooms, not on quarterdecks. You're wasting your intelligence, wasting the connections I could provide you, on something that brings no tangible benefit to this family." At the time, a younger, more naive version of me believed he simply didn't understand my passion, my deep need to serve something larger than myself. But looking back now, as I drove to my sister's wedding, I finally understood. Tangible benefit to the family was code. It never meant honor or duty or sacrifice. It meant stock prices and strategic partnerships. My entire life, my entire career, was merely a misfiled entry in their ledger. He was wrong, of course. My choice was not a waste, it had forged me into the woman I was. But he was also right about one thing: it had come at a cost. The cost was a profound, unshakable loneliness. A solitude one could only discover either in the vast, empty expanse of an ocean or in a crowded room full of one's own relatives. My family viewed my career as an abstraction, a series of pins on a map. To me, it was a life lived in steel corridors, under skies that held no pity. The early years were a blur of missed holidays. My first Christmas as an officer was spent on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, the air thick with sand and tension. I remember calling home on a crackling satellite phone, the delay on the line making the already vast distance even greater. On the other end, I could hear the familiar sounds of a Newport Christmas party: clinking glasses, distant carols, a faraway peal of laughter. My mother's voice was bright but distant. "Oh, Evelyn, darling, not a great time. We're just sitting down to dinner." Through the static, I heard Isabel excitedly describing a new diamond bracelet. The call lasted less than a minute. There were no questions like, "Are you safe?" or "wa miss you." While they passed a glistening platter of roast goose and poured expensive Bordeaux, I sat in the windowless, metallic mess hall of the ship, eating a cold MRE of beef stew. That was the moment I truly understood. I wasn't just absent, I was forgotten. An inconvenient detail in their perfect holiday narrative. My promotions didn't come from family connections or a well-placed phone call. They were earned in 36-hour watches on the bridge, fueled by cold black coffee and an iron will not to fail. They were earned by making split, second life, or death decisions, with the lives of 200 sailors in my hands. I remember one deployment in the North Sea. A rogue storm, a weather bomb, that appeared out of nowhere, turned the ocean into a roiling gray beast. Waves as tall as office buildings slammed into the bow with the sound of cannon fire. For 2 straight days, I didn't leave the command deck. I lived on hardtack and the adrenaline pumping through my veins, my eyes burning from staring at the radar, coordinating our every move to keep the ship from being torn apart. We made it back to port in Scotland, exhausted, bruised but intact. I felt a quiet, profound pride deep in my bones for my crew and for myself. That same week, I saw a photo Isabel had posted from the breakers in Palm Beach. She was wrapped in a plush white robe, a cucumber slice over one eye, with a caption lamenting how exhausted she was after a grueling week of shopping. The contrast didn't spark anger or envy, it created an abyss. It was as if we lived in different realities, operating under different laws of physics, where my exhaustion was a matter of survival, and hers merely a luxury. In her world, my entire life remained invisible. Yet, the warmth I never found in the gilded cage of my family, I discovered in the most unexpected places, on those gray steel decks. It was in the small, unspoken gestures of my crew. I remember a young Marcus Evans, then just an ensign, quietly placing a steaming mug of hot chicken soup into my cold, trembling hands after a brutal watch in the frigid Arctic. He said little, simply, "Admiral must need this." Junior officers, my chiefs, would somehow know it was my birthday, and a crooked homemade cake would mysteriously appear in the galley. They were my family. They saw the dark circles under my eyes and understood their origin. They saw the rank on my collar and understood the price it had cost. They didn't care about my last name or my father's stock portfolio. They cared about the officer standing beside them, the one who would go through hell with them. It was a fierce, unvarnished loyalty that money could never buy, a loyalty my family would never comprehend. This truth was never clearer than after the Orion incident. It was the mission that almost ended my career, the one where I had to disobey a direct order to save my crew. When I finally got a few days of leave, I returned home to Newport. The silence in the house was heavy. At the dinner table, over a perfectly cooked beef tenderloin, I tried to recount the story to my father. I spoke of the crushing pressure, the sonar malfunction, the impossible choice I was forced to make. He nodded vaguely, his eyes glued to the financial news scrolling across the large TV screen in the living room. "Sounds stressful," he said, his voice tinged with disinterest. "Oh, by the way, Lockheed Martin's stock is up again." Before I could reply, Isabel interjected, wrinkling her nose. "Oh, Daddy, can't you stop talking about such gruesome things? It's ruining my appetite." I stopped speaking. I looked at their faces, bathed in the soft glow of the dining room chandelier, and realized that they didn't just not care, they were incapable of understanding. In their safe, predictable world, war, danger, life, and death were merely abstract concepts from a movie. They were not my reality. My reality, with all its grit and honor, was merely an inconvenient story, an interruption to their perfectly seasoned meal. In the cold, indifferent world my family inhabited, I was a ghost. But on the steel decks of the U.S. Navy, among the very people I had sworn to lead and protect, I was seen. The warmth I never found in the mahogany, paneled rooms of Newport, I discovered in the small, steadfast actions of the family I chose. And central to that family was Captain Marcus Evans. Mark wasn't just my executive officer, he became the quiet guardian of my sanity. He learned to read the weather of my moods, especially after the cold, infrequent phone calls from my parents. He knew that my family was a vulnerability, a chink in my armor. After a particularly harsh conversation with my mother, he wouldn't pry or offer platitudes. Instead, a moment later, a mug of hot Earl Grey tea, black unsweetened, would appear on my desk. He never asked what was said. He simply stated, "Admiral looks tired." Perhaps Admiral should rest for a bit. He built an invisible buffer around me, a quiet sanctuary where my pain didn't need explanation. While my family erected walls to keep me out, Mark built a fortress to protect me. That quiet, intuitive care was worth more than 1,000 empty apologies. He also became my personal historian, the only one who kept a record of a history my own relatives chose to ignore. He remembered milestones that I, myself, often forgot in the relentless pace of work. On the 10th anniversary of my taking command of my first ship, the USS Gonzales, I was buried in operations reports, but completely oblivious. But when I walked into my office that morning, a small, intricately crafted model of a destroyer sat on my desk. Beside it, a handwritten card on plain government stationery. It read, "Happy Anniversary, Admiral. She was a lucky ship to have you." He had remembered. He had taken the time to learn the chapters of my life, not out of idle curiosity, but out of a deep and abiding respect. In those moments, a profound sense of gratitude would wash over me. It was the feeling of being truly seen, a validation that the sacrifices I had made mattered to someone. Our bond was deepest not in words, but in shared silence. I remember one night, weeks after the official inquiry into the Orion incident had concluded, a conclusion that exonerated me, but left scars. We were on the deck of the USS Farragut, cutting through the warm, dark waters of the Arabian Sea. The stars, a brilliant, indifferent canopy above us. I had been silent for a long time, just watching the ship's phosphorescent wake. "Admiral is thinking about them, aren't you?" Mark's voice was soft, almost a whisper over the engine hum. I didn't have to ask who them was, he knew. My shoulders slumped, a rare break in my military posture. "Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it, Mark," I confessed, my voice thin. "All of this." He didn't reply immediately. He just stood beside me, a steady presence, and looked up at the American flag, snapping crisply in the night wind. "It's worth it to the people on this ship, Admiral," he finally said, his gaze unwavering. "It's worth it to me." And in the end, that was the only family that truly mattered. He didn't try to mend my fractured relationship with my parents. He simply reminded me of the family I had chosen, the family I had fought for. That quiet loyalty had been forged into an unbreakable alliance on the day my career almost ended. When Vice Admiral Harrison Croft attempted to make me a scapegoat for the Orion disaster, I was summoned to a closed-door Pentagon hearing. The political machinations were thick, palpable, and I believed I would face it alone. But I was wrong. When the hearing concluded and I walked out of that sterile, intimidating room, exhausted and disillusioned, the first thing I saw was Mark. He had flown from Norfolk to Washington, D.C. on his own dime. He stood across the hall in his crisp, white service dress uniform, under the harsh fluorescent lights, holding a black umbrella, even though we were indoors. He walked toward me, his face grim but resolute. He didn't say, "I told you so," or, "Are you okay?" He simply opened the umbrella, as if to shield me from more than just the rain outside. "I'm here, Admiral," he said, his voice low, steady as an anchor. "Whatever happens next, I'm not going anywhere. The truth has a witness." In that moment, under a ridiculously formal umbrella in a sterile government hallway, I knew I wasn't alone. Our alliance wasn't built on blood or a shared last name. It was forged in the fire of shared duty, tempered by the storms of the sea, and sealed with a quiet, unshakable loyalty. It was stronger than blood, and it would prove to be the only thing I could truly count on. When the final storm, the one brewing within my own family, finally broke, the alliance I had with Mark became my fortress. In the years that followed, it stood as a bastion of loyalty in a world where my blood relatives saw me as nothing more than a tool. I had been naive to believe that the aftermath of the Orion incident might have changed them, that a near catastrophe might have realigned their priorities. But I was wrong. A month before Isabel's wedding, a phone call from my father proved that some people never change, they merely discover new, more insidious ways to exploit you. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office at Naval Station Norfolk, reviewing personnel files. My phone rang, and the caller ID displayed Richard Vance. A rare occurrence, my father mostly communicated through terse, impersonal holiday texts. I answered, a familiar caution tightening my stomach, but his voice was unusually warm, almost jovial. "Evelyn, darling, long time. How are you?" I was instantly wary. This was not the voice of the man who had skipped my graduation. This was a performance. He asked about my health, about the weather in Virginia, about my command. The questions a normal father would ask, but coming from him, they felt staged and unsettling. "I hear your fleet just landed a major contract for next-generation sonar technology," he said casually. Fascinating stuff. For a foolish, desperate moment, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Perhaps he was finally trying. Perhaps after all these years, he saw me as more than just a deviation from his life plan. "So," I replied cautiously, sharing a few unclassified details about the project's scope. We spoke for almost 10 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in years. I began to relax, lowering my guard. And that's when the trap was sprung. "Oh, by the way," he said, his voice shifting seamlessly into the clipped, purely professional tone I knew all too well, "your old acquaintance, Vice Admiral Harrison Croft, happens to be a business partner of mine. He has a subsidiary company bidding on that sonar contract. He was saying it would be very beneficial to have someone on the inside, someone like you, who could perhaps nudge the procurement committee in their direction, or maybe just offer a little insight into the competing bids. It would be a huge help to the family business, Evelyn." The line went silent. The warmth in my chest from moments before turned to ice. It had all been a lie. The entire conversation was a calculated prelude to this request. I wasn't his daughter, I was an asset, an intelligence source to be leveraged for his and Croft's financial gain. The disillusionment was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. He didn't see Evelyn, the woman, the officer. He saw the 2 silver stars on my shoulders and the doors he thought they could open for him. "No," I said, my voice flat and cold. "Absolutely not. What you're asking is unethical, illegal, and a violation of my oath." My father's feigned warmth evaporated. "Don't be so dramatic," he snapped, before abruptly hanging up. Hours later, my mother called, her weapon of choice not a direct assault, but a wave of guilt and passive aggression. "Evelyn, you've disappointed your father," she began, her voice a practiced symphony of sorrow. "You just don't understand, do you? Everything your father does, he does for this family, for Isabel's future. To maintain the lifestyle we've all worked so hard for." The familiar lecture began a litany of words about loyalty and duty. "Just a little help is all he asked for. You're always so rigid, so military. Sometimes you need to be flexible for the people who love you." Her definition of flexible was for me to commit a federal crime. Her definition of family was a closed circle that included her, my father, and Isabel. I was an outsider, expected to contribute but never truly belong. The final, most shameful assault came from Isabel herself. She called me that evening, her voice choked with feigned sobs. "Evelyn, Mother told me everything," she wailed. "How could you do that to Daddy? He's been so stressed about his investments." Then came the manipulation, cloaked in bridal anxiety. She spoke of the escalating wedding costs, the caterer, the flowers, the dream of a perfect honeymoon in an overwater bungalow in Bora Bora. "It's just a small thing, sis," she pleaded, her voice pathetic. "You have everything, your career, your important position. I just want a good start to my new life. Can't you help us just this once?" She was using her wedding, her one happy day, as a tool for emotional blackmail. She was weaponizing her tears. That was it. That was the moment. The last vestiges of sorrow in my heart burned away, leaving behind something else, a cold, stark anger. The disillusionment was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. They had used every tactic in their playbook: feigned affection, guilt, and now a damsel in a wedding dress. They had treated my honor, the very core of who I was, as a commodity to be bargained with. Fine. They wanted a perfect Newport wedding. I would be there. But I wouldn't be coming alone. I would be bringing the truth. And the truth didn't wear beige. My cold resolve, forged after Isabel's manipulative phone call, propelled me north to Newport. I checked into the Viking Hotel, a historic landmark just a short drive from my family's sprawling coastal estate. I didn't call them to announce my arrival. I knew they'd find out. The day before the wedding, driven by a final, faint sense of obligation, I drove to the Chandler at Cliff Walk, the opulent venue overlooking the Atlantic. The ballroom was a hive of activity. My mother and Isabel were in deep discussion with a harried-looking wedding planner, pointing at floral arrangements and linen swatches. I approached them, my footsteps muffled on the marble floor. "It all looks beautiful," I said, my voice flat. My mother looked up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before it was masked by a strained smile. "Evelyn, you're here?" She turned back to the planner. Isabel merely offered a slight wave, then leaned in to whisper something to her maid of honor, who giggled and glanced at me. I tried to offer a suggestion about the seating chart, noting that 2 older cousins might prefer to be away from the band. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "The professionals have it handled, darling. What do you know about these things?" I was an outsider, a visitor in my own family's life landscape, invited only to observe from a distance. That distance widened into a chasm at the rehearsal dinner that evening. The event was held at an exclusive restaurant on Bowen's Wharf, the air redolent with the scent of salt and expensive perfume. The head table, a long, beautifully adorned affair, was reserved for the immediate family: my parents, Isabel and her fiancé, and his parents. There was no place for me. The wedding planner, a young woman with a perpetually anxious expression, approached me apologetically. "Rear Admiral Hayes," she stammered. "There's a seat for Rear Admiral over here." She gestured to a smaller round table in a corner, near the service entrance. The family friends table. I was seated next to a great aunt I hadn't seen in 20 years, who spent the entire evening asking me if I was still in the Coast Guard. I sat there, sipping a glass of sparkling water, and observed. I watched my father stand, tap his glass for attention, and launch into a glowing speech praising my wonderful daughter, Isabel. He spoke of her beauty, her charm, her bright future. He spoke of legacy and pride. Throughout the 5-minute address, he did not once glance in my direction. He did not once mention my name. It was a public, masterful erasure. In that room, in front of everyone they knew, Richard Vance made it clear that he had only one daughter worthy of recognition. The final straw was not a grand, dramatic event. It was small, quiet, and utterly devastating. I had spent months searching for the perfect wedding gift for Isabel. Not something from the registry, but something meaningful. I found it in an antique shop in Annapolis, a heavy brass marine compass from the 1940s. I had it engraved with the wedding date and the geographical coordinates of the tiny Newport chapel where our grandparents had been married. It was a symbol of guidance, of a true beginning, of the real family legacy they pretended to care about. At the dinner, during a lull in conversation, I walked to the head table and presented the small, velvet-wrapped gift to Isabel. "Oh, thanks," she said, her voice distracted. She unwrapped it, glanced at the compass for a fraction of a second, then set it down on the table with a soft thud. Her attention was immediately drawn to a friend loudly admiring a new, sparkling diamond tennis bracelet on Isabel's wrist. The compass lay forgotten, next to a bread plate. Later, as dinner was winding down, I saw a server clearing the table. He scooped up the bread plates, the used napkins, and his hand brushed the compass, almost sweeping it into the trash with the other discards. My gift, my months of thought, the symbol of our shared history, had been treated like disposable clutter. I stood up and walked out of the restaurant. No one noticed. I walked along the wharf, past the gleaming yachts, and onto the cliff walk. The wind was cold, salty, whipping at my face, but I felt nothing. No tears, not this time. The deep, persistent ache that had been my lifelong companion had finally burned itself out, leaving something else in its place at a pure, stark rage. 25 years of being overlooked, dismissed, used, and now publicly humiliated. The discarded compass wasn't just a gift, it was me. My values, my history, my honor. All indifferently swept aside. I stopped and looked out at the dark, roiling Atlantic. The ocean didn't judge. It was vast, powerful, and honest. In its roar, I found my own. The dutiful, compliant daughter was gone, washed away by a final wave of disrespect. I took a deep, steady breath, the salty air filling my lungs. Never again. I whispered into the wind. No more silence. No more making myself small to fit into their narrow world. The war had been declared, not with warships or weapons, but with the one thing they feared most. Unvarnished truth. In life, each of us has a breaking point, that singular moment where endurance ends and decisive action begins. The moment you look in the mirror and declare, "Enough." What was your breaking point? Share your moment of finding your power in the comments below. The rage that had consumed me on the cliff walk didn't dissipate, it crystallized. Back in the sterile quiet of my hotel room, the pain was gone, replaced by the cold, stark focus of a commander preparing for battle. I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened the encrypted laptop I carried on all deployments. My mission was no longer personal anguish, it was the exposure of a truth that had been buried for too long. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. I sought something cleaner, colder justice. At 200 hours, I placed a secure call to Captain Marcus Evans. He answered instantly, his voice alert. "Mark," I began, my voice devoid of emotion, clipped and precise as a mission brief. "I need everything you can get on Vice Admiral Harrison Croft, specifically regarding the Orion incident. I want the unredacted reports, the raw audio logs from Command Central, and all original witness testimonies. Cross-reference them with any financial ties between Croft and my father's investment firm. I need it all." There was no hesitation, no why questions, just the calm, unwavering reply of a trusted officer. "Understood, Admiral. Give me 12 hours. I knew Mark wasn't just my subordinate. He was the hub of an informal network of loyal officers, many of whom had also been marginalized or harmed by Croft's political machinations. My weapon in this war wouldn't be a Tomahawk missile, it would be information, and I was about to launch a full-scale information warfare campaign. While I waited, I turned my attention to the present. I pulled up high-resolution photos from Isabel's engagement party. My eyes scanned the fake smiles and champagne flutes, stopping at the intricately carved gold necklace around my sister's neck. A gift, the tag read, from the Croft Legacy Foundation, a charitable front for a man with no charity. Croft never did anything without strategic purpose. My training as an intelligence officer kicked in. I zoomed in, enhancing the image. The necklace's design was intricate, but it seemed heavier, bulkier than a purely decorative piece. Along the carved edge, I detected a nearly invisible seam, one that didn't belong. A cold suspicion bloomed in my mind. I immediately sent the encrypted image file to Mark with a single, clear directive. Analyze this object. Highest priority. This wedding was no longer just a family drama. It had the hallmarks of a hostile operation. By dawn, as the first gray light of morning filtered into my room, a secure email from Mark arrived. The subject line was a single word, Orion Unredacted. I opened the file. The raw truth was even more damning than I remembered. The unredacted reports showed Croft had personally bypassed safety protocols, pushing the USS Orion into a dangerous underwater canyon to show off a new, unproven sonar system to a group of potential investors. Then came the audio logs, his voice chillingly clear and cold in the face of disaster, asset compromised. "We will maintain and control the narrative. Acceptable risk of life. acceptable risk. He was talking about my people. Then my own voice cut through the chaos. A recording I hadn't heard in years. I was a commander then. Negative order. I am overriding that order. We are initiating search and rescue protocols now. My hand clenched into a fist. The evidence was irrefutable. Croft wasn't just incompetent. He was a monster who had weighed human lives against his career and found them wanting. The final piece lay in the list of survivors from the incident. My eyes scanned the names until one jumped out: Captain Douglas Miller, retired. I remembered him. A good, steady commander who had been forced into early retirement after the official, sanitized report was released. A quick search showed he was living in Mystic, Connecticut, just an hour's drive from Newport. I found his number and called, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic thrum. A cautious older man's voice answered. "Captain Miller?" I said. "This is Evelyn Hayes." There was a long pause on the other end. Then his voice shifted, warmth and respect flooding into it. "Commander Hayes?" He corrected me, using the rank I held then. "I'll never forget what you did for my crew, for me that day." I briefly explained the situation. The wedding, Croft's presence, my father's involvement. Captain Miller needed no convincing. "That bastard's going to be there," he growled, his voice rumbling. "Good, then I'll be there too." It's time the real story was told. I hung up, a grim satisfaction settling within me. I now had all the components for my operation. I had the irrefutable evidence. I had the motive. And now I had a living, breathing witness with unimpeachable credibility. Croft and my family thought they were attending a wedding. They had no idea they were about to step into a court-martial, and the stage was set. I looked at the crisp white service dress uniform hanging ready. It was time to put it on. I entered the grand ballroom of the Chandler with the deliberate calm of a commander boarding her flagship. I was not in the beige dress. I was in my service dress white uniform, the 2 silver stars on my shoulder boards catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. As I stepped inside, a ripple of silence spread across the room. The polite chatter of the Newport elite died in their throats, every head turned. I saw my mother, Eleanor, across the room. Her face, a mask of social grace moments before, stiffen, her skin paling with fury. My father, Richard, caught my eye and immediately turned away, presenting his back to me as if I were a stranger. Isabel stared, pure, venomous disbelief on her face. I ignored them all. With my back straight and my chin held high, I calmly walked to my assigned seat, the solitary chair in the very last row, a place of exile, and sat down. My presence in that uniform was not a plea for attention. It was a declaration of war. The ceremony began, a symphony of orchestrated perfection. The officiant spoke of love, trust, and honor, words that sounded hollow and blasphemous in that room. From my vantage point, I watched the front row. Vice Admiral Harrison Croft sat there, the picture of gravitas, applauding politely. My father sat beside him, nodding in agreement, a loyal business partner. The air was thick with hypocrisy. Then came the moment I had waited for. The officiant, with a warm smile, said, "At this time, we'd like to take a moment to honor the brave men and women of our armed forces who may be present here today." As planned, Captain Marcus Evans stood. He was in his service dress whites, a steadfast pillar of integrity in the opulent room. But he didn't just stand. He pivoted, turning on his heel to face the back of the room. He looked directly at me. His hand rose to his brow in a crisp, perfect military salute that cut through the air. And then he spoke, his voice not loud, but echoing through the stunned silence with absolute authority. "Rear Admiral Evelyn Hayes, ma'am." A collective gasp swept through the room, whispers erupted like wildfire. "A Rear Admiral, here?" Sitting in the back. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, her face a mixture of horror and dawning recognition. My father froze mid-smile. Isabel stared, mouth agape. The timing was precise. Immediately after Marge's salute, the large screens flanking the altar, which had been set to display a romantic slideshow, flickered and went black. A moment later, they lit up again, not with smiling photos of the happy couple, but with the cold blue and green tactical display of an underwater sonar map, the map of the Orion incident. Mark, through a former Navy technician on the venue's AV team, had taken control. Then the speakers crackled. Croft's voice, amplified throughout the silent ballroom, was chillingly clear, acceptable risk of life. Control the narrative. The crowd murmured a low, confused hum. Then my own voice boomed from the past, sharp and decisive. Negative order. I am overriding that order. Initiate search and rescue protocols now. The screens switched to harrowing footage from a deep sea rove, showing the mangled submarine hull and the desperate, heroic work of rescue divers. The confused murmur in the room turned to stark shock. Croft sprang to his feet, his face as white as my uniform. "This is slander! This data has been fabricated!" he shrieked, his voice hoarse. My father stood beside him, stammering about a technical glitch, a tasteless joke. But before their lies could take root, another figure from the crowd rose. He was an older man in a simple tweed jacket, but he stood with an unshakable authority. "My name is Douglas Miller," he declared, his voice ringing with the command of a lifelong captain. The room fell silent again. "I was the commanding officer of the USS Orion. That recording is real. That footage is real. Vice Admiral Croft, right there, abandoned us to die to save his career." His gaze then shifted, finding me in the back row. He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with a timeless gratitude. "And that woman," he said, a steady finger pointing, "the one you made sit in the back of the room, was then Commander Hayes. She disobeyed a cowardly order, and she saved our lives." Though in civilian clothes, Captain Miller stood at attention and gave me a slow, deliberate nod. The room erupted. It was no longer whispers but shouts. Phones were raised, cameras flashed, capturing the chaos. The carefully constructed facade of the Vance Croft dynasty didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces in front of everyone who mattered. Game over. The moment Captain Miller finished his address, the opulent ballroom plunged into chaos. The carefully orchestrated symphony of the wedding dissolved into a cacophony of gasps, panicked whispers, and the relentless flashing of cell phone cameras. The guests, pillars of Newport and Washington society, were no longer passive observers. They were witnesses, and their phones were broadcasting the downfall of two powerful men in real time. Socialite reporters who had come for a story of peonies and lace now had the scandal of the decade. I watched Vice Admiral Harrison Croft, his face a sickening white, attempt to make a discreet exit, but his path was silently, immovably blocked by Captain Marcus Evans and two other officers I recognized, all standing at parade rest. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. Their steadfast presence was a wall of honor he could not breach. My father, Richard, attempted damage control, his voice sputtering like an engine trying to catch. "A misunderstanding, a technical error," he pleaded to anyone who would listen. But no one was listening. They were all watching the Vance and Croft empires crumble to dust. They had built their house of cards on a foundation of lies, and they had underestimated the storm that was their discarded daughter. The venue's security, looking utterly bewildered, quickly escorted the principal players, my parents, a tear-streaked Isabel, a deeply shocked Croft, and myself, into a private lounge adjacent to the main hall. The heavy oak door swung shut, muffling the noise but trapping us in a suffocating silence. It didn't last. My mother, Eleanor, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen before, lunged at me. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You've ruined everything. The family's reputation, your sister's wedding, years of work, all gone!" My father, his bravado utterly vanished, simply pointed a trembling finger at me. "You'll pay for this, Evelyn. I swear to God, you'll pay." But their words, once so potent, now sounded like spent ammunition. They were just noise. The meaningless anger of cornered animals. I looked directly into my mother's furious eyes, and my voice, when it came, was steady and cold. "A reputation built on lies isn't a reputation, Mother. It's a prison. And today I set myself free. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry. My calm, The unnatural stillness of a ship in the eye of a hurricane seemed to frighten them more than any outburst. Isabel, her designer wedding dress now looking like a costume, ran to clutch my arm. Her mascara was streaked, her face smudged. "Evelyn, please," she sobbed. The practiced tears of a lifetime of manipulation flowed freely. "Just take it back! Tell them it was a mistake! You've ruined my most important day." I looked down at her hands, clutching my sleeve, hands that had always received everything with ease. "Your most important day," I said, my voice soft but firm, "was being funded by a cover-up that almost cost dozens of men their lives. Is that truly the foundation you want for your marriage, Isabel?" I gently, deliberately unpeeled her fingers from my arm. The physical contact was broken, and with it, something final. "The game's over, Isabel," I said. "There's no one left for you to manipulate." For the first time in her life, she looked at me, not with disdain, but with a dawning, bewildered horror, as if seeing an inexplicable stranger who somehow bore her sister's face. Just then, the oak door opened again. It wasn't hotel security. Two grim-faced men in dark suits, their badges clipped to their belts, walked in, followed by two uniformed Newport police officers. They ignored the rest of us. Their focus was singular. Vice Admiral Harrison Croft, the lead agent, said, his voice flat and official, "You are under arrest for suspicion of obstruction of justice and falsification of national defense intelligence in connection with the Orion incident." As they cuffed Croft, a loud, echoing click in the silent room, my father crumpled into a brocade armchair as if his strings had been cut. In that moment of suspended chaos, I turned and walked towards the door. "Evelyn, where are you going?" my mother called, her voice a strange blend of command and desperation. I didn't turn back. I paused at the threshold, my hand on the door. "I'm going where I belong," I said, my voice clear and decisive for all of them to hear. "And it's not here anymore." I stepped out of the room, leaving the wreckage of my family behind, and closed the door on a life that was no longer mine. The air in the hallway, though still buzzing with the aftershocks of the event, felt cleaner, lighter. I felt empty, but it was a peaceful emptiness, a void where a lifetime of pain had once resided. The battle was over, but I knew the real war, the one to heal and reclaim my own life, was just beginning. Months passed. The Vance Croft wedding scandal slowly faded from the headlines. Harrison Croft was facing a court-martial, his illustrious career ending in ignominy. My father's business took a severe hit as partners and investors fled the stench of scandal. I heard through the grapevine that the wedding had been unceremoniously called off. I felt nothing about it. Their world had become a foreign country to me. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was taking a rare stroll along the Norfolk waterfront, watching the destroyers and carriers glide in and out of port. A young woman pushing a stroller hesitated, then approached me. "Excuse me," she said, her voice timid. "Are you Rear Admiral Hayes?" I nodded, offering a small smile. Her eyes welled up. "My husband, he was an enlisted man on the Orion. He always talks about you. He says he's alive today because of you." The little girl in the stroller, no older than 5, with bright, curious eyes, held out a crayon drawing. It was a crooked rendering of a large gray ship and a stick figure in a white uniform with bright yellow hair. "Thank you," she whispered. I took the drawing from her tiny hand, my throat tight. I looked from the child's earnest face to the simple, heartfelt piece of paper. This was the recognition I had craved my entire life. It didn't come in a Newport mansion or at a socialite gala. It came on a windswept pier, a gift from the very people I had sworn to protect. My true legacy wasn't my name, it was theirs. That evening, back in my office, looking out at the water, I did something I hadn't done in years. I tried to write a letter to my family. I filled pages with explanations, with lingering pain, with reasons why. I tried to make them understand. But after reading it back, I realized the futility of it. I wasn't writing it for them. I was writing it for a younger version of myself, who still believed they might one day listen. I no longer needed their understanding. I no longer owed them an explanation. With a sense of finality, I tore the letter into pieces, just as I had torn that check all those years ago. I opened my desk drawer and took out the antique brass compass, the one Isabel had discarded. Mark had quietly retrieved it from the restaurant that night and returned it to me. I polished its surface with my thumb and placed it on my desk, right beside my command insignia. It was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was my own true north, a reminder that my direction was my own, guided by my own values, not by the shifting winds of their approval. The most important forgiveness I needed wasn't from them, but for myself, for spending so many years hoping for a love they were incapable of giving. The following spring, I was invited back to Annapolis. It wasn't a grand event. It was a quiet, solemn ceremony in the Naval Academy's Memorial Hall. A new bronze plaque was being unveiled. It didn't just list the names of the fallen. For the first time, it officially recognized the Orion incident, honoring the extraordinary courage and decisive leadership that had saved the crew. My name was there, etched into the enduring metal. Captain Marcus Evans, newly promoted, stood beside me. Captain Douglas Miller was there, along with dozens of other Orion survivors, their faces aged, but their gratitude unchanged by time. There were no news cameras, no politicians, just sailors, a family bound by shared respect for true honor. As I reached out and touched the cool, raised letters of my own name, a profound sense of peace washed over me. History, at last, had been written correctly. The story ends, but my life does not. It begins anew. Just this morning, I stood on the bridge of the USS Gerald R. Ford, one of the most powerful warships ever built. A new command, a larger fleet, a greater responsibility. As the first rays of dawn broke across the vast, empty Atlantic, Captain Marcus Evans stood beside me. "A beautiful morning, Admiral," he said. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. The sun was rising, painting the horizon in strokes of gold and orange. The past was a shadow behind me, and the future was an open ocean. "Yes, it is, Mark," I replied, my voice filled with a hope I thought I'd lost forever. A very beautiful day. I was no longer the rejected daughter of the Vance family. I was Rear Admiral Evelyn Hayes, a leader, a mentor, a protector. And my legacy would not be found in their family albums. It would be written on the waves, a testament to courage, to integrity, and to the profound truth that sometimes, the family we choose is the one that truly defines us. My friends, we all carry a past that shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. Your true legacy is the one you build for yourself, starting today. What's the first step you'll take to build yours? Share your promise to the future in the comments below. And if this story touched your soul, please consider subscribing to our channel for more tales of resilience and triumph. Thank you.